Welcome back, everyone, to Red Spotlight. I'm your host, Alexis Soto, joined this time on a very special episode indeed. Hopefully this will be dropped on Halloween night or the day before. I don't know which one it'll be, but it is a Halloween special nonetheless. I am joined, this is what also makes it a special occasion this time, Peter Martinez has returned. Has returned for the first time in many, many moons. And today we're here. We had to make it a special event to, have him back for, us sitting. And I think it couldn't be more special than this, than to have not just a Halloween special, but of course, what would a movie podcast like ours do with a Halloween special? Talk about horror films, of course. And what better movies to really celebrate the season than the Universal classic monster films, of which include Dracula, Frankenstein, Mummy, Invisible Man, Creature from Black Lagoon, Phantom of the Opera, Wolfman. That's all going to be here, as well as the history of this momentous era in Hollywood and filmmaking. And of course, it is special because this is my first time actually watching these movies and experiencing them. These particular icons, if you will, because they are icons, have been so ingrained in pop culture. Everybody knows who these characters are. Everybody knows these looks. But as per usual, I didn't experience these in my childhood. And so here, going through them, you're going to see what I felt. And yeah, that's today's episode of Red Spotlight. Peter, thank you so much for being here. I know it couldn't have been easy to book us into your busy schedule.
It was not.
Yeah, basically. Anyway, this was so last minute, okay? Sometimes when we go into a Halloween season, like September, October, we like to do To the Tables where we have a focus on horror films. But, maybe it was just the season that really bit me this year. I had seen several in a row, Pearl, Barbarian, and Smile. And then, of course, Werewolf by Night was dropped on Disney+. And that's the one that really kind of awakened something. It's like, you know what? I want to see more of this. Maybe it's time to actually go back and revisit some old friends. And that's exactly what happened. So before we get into, of course, a lot with the classic Universal monsters, I did want to hear what you thought of Werewolf by Night, because for me, anyway, it's easily my favorite Marvel thing this year, and I'll tell you why. I don't associate this with Marvel in the least. This is the first thing in a long time Marvel has made where it's I don't think of Marvel at the top of my mind. It is so far removed from it, and I was praising the hell out of it a few weeks ago when I was talking with David and with Alexis, and I was just...
What did they think of it?
Alexis hadn't seen it yet, and David was rather ambivalent.
Wow.
Yeah, that was my impression anyway. But I loved this so much because this was something I had been craving for. I had watched also reactions to this special, shall we say, or short film, however you want to, whatever persuasion you have, I think can work, obviously. And just seeing people's reactions to a lot of the big moments in this are just the atmosphere, the aesthetic. It is... I love it. That was me. And I credit Werewolf by Night for really sparking this interest in going back and watching the classic films, of which, the reason why it should be pretty obvious, but that special, or that short film, if you want to say, was very much its own thing, sure, but a loving homage to, of course, these old movies. And so you actually had a minute available to see this. And so what were your thoughts?
Well, luckily it's not that long. It's an hour. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the first... You know how they keep saying we're going to branch out different genres, do different things with the MCU. And one of my big criticisms is always how they pull their punches. And they never go through with it. right?
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the very few times where I would give credit and say they went through with it. You know, there is violence. It is wholly its own thing. You know, the black and white thing isn't just a tiny little gimmick. It's there for the vast, vast, vast majority of the runtime. It is in no way connected to anything else out there. You know, it very much does its own thing. It does a really good job, I think, of maintaining its own unique tone that isn't just winking and going like, oh my gosh, isn't this crazy that this is happening? The score is really well done. Visually, there's an actual attempt to do anything interesting at all.
Yeah, right?
Just at all.
So wonderfully directed by Michael Giacchino.
Yes. And that's another thing. As a first-time director, I was like, yeah, this is nice. You know? This is well done. And of course, he saves his best stuff for his own feature debut.
His musical compositions, you mean?
Yes.
That theme is amazing. I fucking love that score. I've actually made a playlist. I added it to my score playlist. That theme, in addition, and I put it side by side to the old like themes of these movies that we're going to discuss, and it kind of fits.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
That's one thing he gets perfect. It's that. Yeah, on the whole, again, it's not too long. It's just long enough. And I thought like, oh, an hour, is it gonna feel like kind of rushed and like but no, I think it works fine as a special. You know, you get a whole little story and it works great. It's fun. The makeup effects are great.
Oh yes, the camera work, cinematography, even. The actors, yes, so good in this. They were particularly, I want to, throw out, well, I mean, I think all of them. Gael had a really nice calmness to him. But I would say the one that I think we all agree, I think everybody agrees, that stole the show for sure was definitely Harriet Sansom Harris, who, of course, played the Baroness, I want to say. Is it the Baroness or?
Yeah. She knew exactly what she was making.
Yeah.
And she ran with it. And she really, I think in a lot of ways, she carried it.
Oh, yeah.
Because every time she came on screen, it was just perfection.
It was, yes.
But yeah, on the whole, and yeah, as someone who grew up watching and loving all those original old monster movies, this is something that you would think that, it can easily sway me, but I think it's the opposite. It's something where I know what the real thing is, so it's like,
you had said to me, if they had done their usual thing, this would have really enraged you.
Yeah, if it had been their usual MCU stupidity, where it's like lightly gesturing at doing something different and then just doing the exact same thing, that would have really annoyed me. But here, no, like it really is its own fun, unique thing. And yeah, sometimes there's a lot of moments where watching it, I forget that it's an MCU thing.
Which to me is a compliment, because I'm so fed up with the MCU.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
Not much to say, but it's just so very entertaining. So with that being said, shall we get into this? History of the classic Universal monster movies. There's so much to say, really. It's kind of hard to know where to start. I guess, to me, what I would like to hear from you, anyway. When did you first experience these films? And what were your thoughts?
Very, very young. And I think I would see them in, like, little bites. I don't think I ever just sat down and watched the whole thing, like, from beginning to end when I was young. But, yeah. I don't know if I watched anything like that at that age. But I remember being mesmerized by them, you know? They had such an enchanting quality that that really pulled me to them. And yeah, I've always loved Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those movies were one of those things where it wasn't necessarily scary, like terrifying to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think at some levels, yeah, it was scary, but it was more like, I don't know, enchanting.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
No, I would say that is my experience as well. Watching these again. As I said several times already, I was already primed for this kind of stuff through Werewolf by Night and everything. But it was just, I mean, for me anyway, it was such fun.
Mm-hmm.
These movies are so much fun. And for some movies nowadays, when people say a movie was fun, yes, that can sound a bit like diminishing, but it was a real great joy to, watch these movies. And just like, it had been a while since I've committed to watching a bunch of old movies, especially in a row like that. And as a, somebody who's very passionate about film and loves all these things about film history, it felt like a lesson almost, in fact, even when I was watching the bonus features that were available on those discs, very informational, that paints a really interesting picture about like what it was like, because these movies came out at a period where so much changed. So much was changing in the film industry. So much was happening in the world. And then when this particular era ended, wow, which is like, what, maybe 2 decades at most, or 2.5 decades, if you will, the world that came out at the other end of it was completely changed over. And it's also interesting because obviously, as the decades have gone by, people's tastes in what they want in films have changed. I mean, you and I have bemoaned for years now how we are so pissed at the general audience for making it like falling out of favor with sentimentality and cheesiness in their movies, that they've been so maligned and completely like pushed to the fringes in the last few years. And then with horror, it's interesting because it has changed, obviously. These films, to a modern audience, from most standpoints, are not particularly scary. But then again, to me and to you, I would say, since we've been really going over a lot of horror films these last few years, scary is not necessarily a requirement for a quality story. If it's a horror movie, it's not. There's different moods and tones for horror. I wasn't particularly scared with like some of the recent horror films, like X, for example, but that was a really good horror movie.
Yeah.
So it's like, however, there are people who treat them as like, well, if it didn't scare me, that means it's not a good horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's how some people would view it, right?
Yeah.
And if they look at these films nowadays, well, it's like the oldest of these movies are so old, they're almost a century old.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Very
how old
close.
they are. Right. And this is, for all intents and purposes, unless I'm mistaken, these particular movies are the birth of a new genre, which is the horror genre.
Yeah. Well, you can argue there are some before it.
Yeah,
like,
and
the Nosferatu.
Oh yes, the unlicensed Dracula movie.
Yeah, which was that was before they had those talkies.
Well before, I even want to say, right? It took a while to get those things out. I think what's helpful for us to get into before we go into the individual movies, again, just to recap, the films that we have here, at least that I watched: Dracula, the Spanish language version. We'll get to the distinction between those two. Frankenstein, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, The Bride of Frankenstein, The Wolf Man, Phantom of the Opera, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. Those are the films that we... Of course, there were many more movies that I hadn't even heard of. Like, and it's kind of hilarious because, like, it kind of reminds me of, like, some franchises that really milk it well beyond. Well, they should have stopped. Like, The Mummy's Ghost, The Mummy's Curse, Son of Dracula.
Oh, I mean, if you're gonna count all of those, I mean, good luck.
House of Dracula, House of Frankenstein, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, Revenge of the Creature, the Invisible Agent, The Invisible Woman. Yeah. The Ghost of Frankenstein, Dracula's Daughter. Those are so many films I haven't seen, but yeah, that's the whole, because I'm looking at the booklet here that came with your collection, and it has a complete, like, basically timeline of these movies from 1925, which began with the silent language, the silent film Phantom of the Opera, to 1956, which is The Creature Walks Among Us, the third in the Creature trilogy. Which I didn't even know there were. 3 of those movies.
I mean, Universal milked it before milking was even...
I mean, this was 20 years.
A term.
This was 20 years. 25 years almost of, like... Yeah, I you can bet your ass they definitely milked it. But I did want to read this because I feel like for people who are not necessarily, like, informed, this particular... I don't know. I guess it's a passage. I don't know. But it will really inform you. A legacy of horror. In a perfect world for fans of vintage monster movies, there would be a Mount Rushmore dedicated to the pioneers most responsible for the classic creatures of Hollywood's fabled past. This landmark would be carved atop one of the hills on the backlot of Universal Pictures, where all of these cinema artists made their mark. Practically born from its inception 1 century ago, Universal Pictures and Monsters have proudly marched hand in claw through cinema history. Real quick aside. At the moment, I'm watching a film by Bill Condon called Gods and Monsters, which features Ian McKellen as James Whale.
Yes.
So it is... And I have this in my mind because, of course, I'm, like, following the ins and outs of the upcoming award season. It is so hilariously typical of these people to award it is an Academy Award winning movie. I mean, I think Ian McKellen got nominated for Best Actor, but it's so funny how this is the only way in which these movies were recognized in the Academy, right? Through a backdoor biopic.
Yeah, well, because a biopic is palatable to them,
right?
But just a regular horror film, trash.
Because I mean, even at the horror films, I'm even amazed because horror films don't exist to the Academy. No, they just don't. So I mean, I found that humorous in light of, like, what would happen in this, in every Oscar season. Universal's early ventures into horror and science fiction included the first ever werewolf movies from 1913, The Werewolf, and 1914's The White Wolf. I never heard of these movies. In 1916, the young company outdid itself with an elaborate 2 years in the making production of Jules Verne's sci-fi submarine adventure 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Not yet one of Hollywood's major studios as it entered the 1920s, Universal still specialized in modest westerns, comedies, serials, and other fare for small-town USA consumption. There were occasional super productions, most memorably 1923's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, the medieval melodrama that raised the curtain on the company's now legendary run of famous monsters, for this adaptation of Victor Hugo's novel. Hollywood's Man of a Thousand Faces, Lon Chaney, applied his own makeup to play the title role of the misshapen bell ringer Quasimodo. It was Universal's top-grossing silent film, and in the wake of its success, the company had its first horror star in Chaney, and its first immortal character in Quasimodo, whose pitiable longing for a beautiful gypsy girl made him one of cinema's most sympathetic monsters, quote-unquote.
Who doesn't want a gypsy girl?
Right. Chaney soon returned to Universal stages for the macabre Phantom of the Opera, 1925 version, playing in the title role of the masked madman lurking in the catacombs of the Paris Opera House. In the silent era, mind you, Universal could not yet make their movies talk, but their movies could make audiences scream. Now, world famous as one of early Hollywood's most shocking moments is the scene in the Phantom's Lair where a young opera-singing beauty unmasks the beast. European director Paul Lenny's The Cat and the Canary, 1927, and The Man Who Laughs, 1928, added Universal's House of Horrors reputation before the studio began to prepare for the advent of sound recording and the talkies.
The Man Who Laughs, that's what inspired the Joker.
Is that so?
Yeah, like
Wow.
if you pull up a photo, it's literally the Joker.
Really? I had no idea. In 1928, with the age of the talkies dawning, Universal president Carl Laemmle made his son Carl Jr. head of the studio as a birthday present. I love this.
Nepotism.
Right? But hey, at least they admit it. Laemmle Jr. had higher aspirations than his father, and there was an immediate increase in the number of prestige productions. Among them, the stunning anti-war statement, All Quiet on the Western Front from 1930. This movie was Universal's first Best Picture Academy Award winner. By the way, they remade that movie this year.
Yes.
Germany, I
I've
believe.
noticed that. Yeah.
Germany remade it, and I think it'll be on Netflix if it's not already there at some point. So that'll be interesting to see.
How the times have changed.
Right? Which is pretty interesting because that's the second year in a row like a famous movie or a former Best Picture winner was made again. Because last year was West Side Story. It won Best Picture back in 1961.
Right, yeah.
And then here we have All Quiet on the Western Front.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty interesting.
I see it also get ignored.
Hey, it got 10 Academy Award nominations and it won one. So I don't know if that's being called ignored. Under Laemmle Jr.'s sponsorship, the studio's Monster Parade began in 1931 with one nightmare character after another rising from the pages of literature and ancient folklore. The procession commenced, with the sound of bat wings as novelist Bram Stoker's vampire Count Dracula came to the screen in the person out of Hungarian actor Bela Lugosi in Dracula. Directed by the master of the macabre Todd Browning, this film version of a recent Broadway play reunited its stars Lugosi, Edward Vance Sloan as Van Helsing, and Herbert Bunston as Dr. Edward. The tale of an undead nobleman preying on the occupants of an English sanitarium. It purposefully resembles a filmed stage play, but nevertheless hits a vein of box office gold. So we can stop there and start off with the one that really got the ball rolling, which was Dracula. And I was laughing to myself when I was watching this. I was like, "Oh, this is where that thing comes from. Like, this is like, Count Dracula. Everybody knows that." But I guess I just never knew where it came from exactly. I mean, I knew I associated that with a freaking Count Dracula, but like, this is literally where it came from.
It's everything. It's the voice. It's the look.
Yes.
It's it's all of it.
I'm obsessed with the look. I love his entrance in the movie.
Children of the night. What music they
listen
make.
to them. Children of the night. I love that line so much, but particularly I was referring to when he gets out of the coffin and the camera just like zooms in on him.
Yeah.
With that like disturbed look on. The look is amazing. The look is so, Bela Lugosi, just like instant icon. Clearly as he was in those days, because this was a runaway success. This film literally was like the Iron Man, if you will, of if we're comparing it to the MCU,
the Dark Universe.
Yeah, the supposed Dark Universe.
Funnily enough, like how you brought up what's it called, Hunchback of Notre Dame. Because, yeah, that was a big one for them. The silent films. I think they had wanted to do a Hunchback of Notre Dame for the Dark Universe.
Great.
I just thought, I'm just trying to imagine what that would have looked like.
Can you do that story anymore?
That's what's tough. It's kind of like a lot of ableism in there. Like, I don't know if you can do it as a horror.
You would have to do a hell of an adaptation.
Yeah. You would have to change a lot.
Yes, I think that's true.
I mean, I guess you could take more of like a Frankenstein angle to it. Much more sympathetic in that way. Sure. But yeah.
Because, I mean, Disney tried to do whatever, I guess, with that movie or that story.
Yeah,
that was so. I really want to be in that room when somebody like said, "Oh yeah, for our next Disney movie, let's do The Hunchback of Notre Dame."
Well, I think at that point they were viewing themselves as very prestige.
Yeah,
you know, so they were really going for it. But Bela Lugosi, instant icon, and I mean, when I think about the movie, I think of the music.
Yes,
I love the little song that leads, opens, and closes the film. I think about his performance. I think about the sets.
Yes,
how beautiful they are, and let me see. I want to get his name right.
Mr. Rainfield. He was one of my takeaways. He played. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing. I was looking at the wrong damn letterbox description here. I believe he was like he was one of the first characters. That dumbass.
The one who got
that
under...
town. I don't know how much.
Him.
I don't know how much more clear they could have been. Like what they tried telling him again and again and again, and then like it's funny in a way because like, and a lot of things in. Particularly the whale horror films are intentionally funny. But here it's like, what's funny to me, it's like, there are so many fucking red flags. I would have jumped out of that fucking caravan the minute I saw a bat just like flying where the damn driver should have been.
That's the one that I told you about that is so funny. Because you can see the little string. As it's like up and down with having like the fake bat flapping up and down.
Yeah,
and it's like, oh, it's great. I don't think it, but that's another thing. When they were making the films, it's not like 4K existed.
Well, black and white was very forgiving. We should just be clear about that to a lot of things. For example, I mean, I know one of the things when I first like realized this was when I was watching a retrospective series on Doctor Who, because Doctor Who, when it first aired, it was in black and white. But they were able to get away with so much. But then when it went to color,
it's like
some of these, you can see it fall apart almost immediately when you see it on screen. And so, I know that lately they've been doing colorized versions. I don't think I'd be interested in seeing a colorized version of Dracula.
Oh, fuck no.
No.
These movies don't work in color.
No.
Because the great filmmakers that make them use the shadows so beautifully.
Oh my God,
like
yes.
the point is the black and white.
Yes.
Like, they use that to their advantage. And I mean, it's for sure Dracula, but there's also like, I think of like the Wolfman, and then when he's like moving through the trees and the fog, man, they love their fog machines.
Yes, right. I love it so much.
But it's great. It's a vibe, and it's so well done.
Yeah.
Like I think easily the most beautiful of them is like the Frankenstein movies, because there's so many scenes where he's just walking through like cemeteries or like towns, and like his massive shape set against shadow, and it's so well done. And color would just fuck it up.
It would feel wrong watching it in color, you know? Like, there are some things like, I know I Love Lucy had some colorized episodes, and those were interesting, but it still was like, you can't beat the way that it was first, made and everything.
But that actor,
Rainfield, Dwight Fry.
He's great.
He's amazing. Oh my goodness. Because, like, he starts out the movie with this, like, basically this dry lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
Stupid guy. I mean, how many warnings did he need, really? And then, of course, he ends up being enslaved. And then he becomes this, like, deformed creature, in a way.
I don't even think he's deformed. He's just insane.
Yes.
And his face, like, he just goes full Joker. Like, just insane. And it's funny because in Horror Nights, they have, like, the mazes, or the original, and he's actually in there.
Is he?
Yeah. There's this guy with a mask and his fucked up smile, like acting all insane, and I noticed him and I got all excited. I was like, oh shit, it's that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's telling how memorable his performance is that they included him. They even included him in that maze.
No, I think he definitely is a big contributing factor, like what makes Dracula as a film work, fundamentally speaking. I also really appreciated Edward Van Sloan's performance as Van Helsing.
Yes.
It was very good, very good.
Mm-hmm. With a lot of these movies, it's early film, so a lot of it is people talking in rooms, right?
Mm-hmm. Which a lot of people in these days, even in new films that come out, would consider a con. And I never understood that. Mm-hmm. Like, to me, some of the best stories are just people in rooms talking.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But I think what's working against them here, too, also, is there's no, like, visual tricks that come along with it.
No, we're still very early in movies. Yeah, that's the period that we're in. It's like, we're so early on. We're so early in this genre. It's like a lot of the stuff that ended up being like, I feel like everybody agrees this, right? Like, Citizen Kane revolutionized the whole game. Yeah. With the camera angles and everything, and even the style of it. Like, that's really where the earliest back we can go that closely resembles what we have today. But that was like, what, 1941? 1942? Mm-hmm. And this came a whole decade before that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is they just had sound, and sound was so new. And in the behind the scenes feature of this, Todd Browning himself was, you could tell, I guess, in the film that he was still highly hesitant with how to even use sound. That particularly with Dracula, it kind of almost is a silent movie, because there are long sequences where a lot happens, but there's just no sound.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know if you've ever seen, like, the way that they had to do sound when it first came out.
No,
but it's like cumbersome. Like again, you can't move the camera around. Like, you got to stick people, and they can't move that much, because they got to capture the sound specifically.
Which that would help explain why there are a lot of static scenes. Where there are a lot of scenes and people just being still and talking.
But I guess my thing is, like, that's why so much relies on the performances.
Yes, everything really.
Really. Well, I think the set and the mood go a long way. Mm-hmm. But then ultimately it comes down to the performances, right? Because that's really what's selling everything. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think these movies work and are remembered, is because of people like Bela Lugosi.
Yes.
Or what's his name? Carl
Lumbly Jr., who is basically like the what's his name? Blumhouse guy. For a modern sensibility, at least Blumhouse is a modern, like, big shot horror executive. Mm-hmm. And Carl Lumbly Jr., as we mentioned, was the one that pretty much spearheaded all this. What other, like, again, like, they're like these little, I don't know if you call them tricks, but it's just like not being able to show much. Like, they never showed him biting anybody. It's just kind of, he's about to bite someone in a very interesting way, and then it just cuts away.
That's the other thing. You can't show anything. Like, the ending is kind of funny, because it's like,
the endings for this movie the endings for this, the first Frankenstein and the Mummy, were hilarious to me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, that's a pretty weird place to stop this movie. If anything, Dracula, I felt swung better, I guess, if that's the way, than the ending of Frankenstein and the ending of the Mummy. But like, still, it just kind of ends.
Well, it's funny because it builds to this climax, but you can't show anything. Because I think censor-wise, like, nothing. So they kind of just, like, say, okay, we did it. We killed him. It's done. You know? Like, I think you can visually hear them, like, driving a stake into his heart.
Yes, Van Helsing, you hear him do that, and you hear Dracula scream.
Yeah.
And then, like, the next thing we see is he's dead.
And they're like, okay, we did it. But you can't see anything.
Yeah.
Right? So stuff like that is kind of funny.
It is. It is. And it's a testament to the limitations of the era in the period in which this movie was made. And frankly, in which a lot of these movies were made, is that's why I've always said that movies are a byproduct of the era they come out in.
Mm-hmm.
That's
For
just
sure.
like, that was the reality of what movies were.
They're wonderful time capsules.
And another example for like why you say the performance is everything, because if it wasn't for that, well, what would carry it? Also, holy shit, these posters are amazing. Like, I am in love with this Dracula poster right here.
Oh, it's great.
This is the Dracula poster.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good.
I think I have the Frankenstein one.
Oh, do you?
The Boris Karloff, yeah.
But no, Bela Lugosi, just a breakout role, a wonderful performance. Yeah. Again, all of these films more or less have the same things going for them as they do against them.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really, Dracula is what kicked everything off. But then also, that same year, miraculously enough, was also their next big hit, which was only their second movie, which was Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
So incredible how both movies came out in the same year. It was such a monumental films, obviously. And so then going back to right here, Universal pulled out all the stops, shock-wise, with its next horror foray, Frankenstein, an adaptation of the 1818 novel by teenager Mary Shelley. In the early planning stages, the role of Frankenstein's patchwork monster was intended for Lugosi, the face of Universal Horrors. It was this face, however, that became the issue. After the application of makeup, the only unhidden parts of the actor were his eyes and chin, and this reportedly prompted Lugosi to bow out. The role passed down to small-time supporting player Boris Karloff, a long-time struggler in the Hollywood vineyards, wearing makeup that was named number 1 on the list of the 50 greatest makeups of all time. Karloff gave an alternately touching and terrifying pantomime performance, which opened the door to stardom for the 44-year-old Englishman. Directed by James Whale, Frankenstein was banned in several countries for its gruesomeness, but like Dracula. So see, it's not a new thing for countries banning films. It seems to have been...
What's so funny is, back then, all they could do gruesome-wise is, like, strangle people.
Yes.
Have you noticed? They just go for everyone's neck.
That's why, with Frankenstein, though, there were some things I was like, for the era? Wow.
Yeah.
You got away with some shit here.
Mm-hmm.
But like Dracula, became one of its year's top grossers. Dracula is a film, going back real quick, I really love almost exclusively for, I said it was Bela Lugosi, for Dwight Frye as Rainfield, and for Van Sloan as Van Helsing. And of course, the aesthetic, the sets, that's great. I feel like it lost me a little bit in the second half of the movie, but it's still definitely engaging. Dracula.
Yeah.
I had no such issue with Frankenstein, on the other hand. Like this one, I was like completely invested, shall we say, all the way through. And it helped that with this one, I mean, to an extent, I know these monsters. I kind of know their stories. And like with who doesn't know what Frankenstein is? Like, or Frankenstein's monster, shall we say, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it's like he's come up, I think one of my earliest introductions to what Frankenstein was like there was an Alvin and the Chipmunks directed DVD or video special.
Oh, I remember those. The animated ones?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Those were nice. And I really enjoyed that particular special or directed to video movie. I don't know. Again, that's showing my age. That's a byproduct itself of the early 2000s, the late 90s, early 2000s. So when those things were like all the rage and like every animated thing ever was like having its own direct to video.
Oh God, I remember. Yeah.
Right? That was the whole thing. However, I also experienced a different version, and one that I think they played it in school one time. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the Kenneth Branagh version
yes,
of it.
with Robert De Niro.
Yes, I remember that one, and that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting. I was curious to see like how that was received. I went back, thought of it. It wasn't received very well. I don't remember much of the movie, but I do remember De Niro and the makeup he had, and that was about it. But more or less, I got like that was the first, I guess, real introduction for like what Frankenstein is really. So, but yeah, I think on the whole, with Frankenstein particularly, I think everything is just improved from Dracula. I think the whole mood, the aesthetic, it's definitely more disturbing. Just off the bat, we start off with, the whole macabre of digging up a grave. We're stealing brains. We see
desecration.
We see a hanged man there, and just the whole idea of them like picking apart body parts, for lack of a better term, to form your own creature. And I'm sure, and even as I believe, was it Whale or was it Lumley that was? Because the film opens with a warning of like, this might be a bit gruesome for a lot of you. Basically, that's what it says. And for 1931, I believe it. Again, you got to keep in mind, this was an audience that wasn't used to horror. Certainly not used to seeing it.
Not used to movies.
No, generally speaking, right? And so, and for a very, at that point, religious community, internationally anyway, the idea of Frankenstein's monster is very blasphemous, shall we say. So, I mean, it comes across as very disturbing, but it's like, off the bat, you know this allegory, the story. It's like, this is basically the thing, you know it coming a mile away. It's man is not meant to go and meddle with these things. And that's the ethos for a lot of these films. Oftentimes these monstrosities, quote unquote, happen because man meddled in what they have no business in meddling. Yeah, and with the Frankenstein,
I think all of them.
Yeah, literally all of them. Well, except for I think Dracula is not really.
Well, hell yeah. The townsfolk said, leave that fucking place alone.
Oh, well, that's... But did man create Dracula? Is that, I guess, the...
No, but they're meddling, right?
Right, yeah.
Like, if there's dark forces, stay the fuck away.
But, I mean, you would think people would know that. But that's certainly not what happened there in that situation. But yeah, and definitely maybe the most heavy-handed would be with Frankenstein. But like for me, this one I really enjoyed. Like, you do notice the direction a bit more, and I feel that's James Whale's touch right there, because he was of a different caliber, shall we say, than a lot of the other ones. Like you notice with the 3 films that he contributed to this particular era, you notice the direction.
I think he has the best visual language.
Yes,
of all of them,
and it mixes very well. To say nothing, of course, of Boris Karloff, that look.
And that's another thing, like with Dracula, where it's like that he created the look of Frankenstein, right? Like the big flat top head.
Yes.
The sunken eyes, the bolts on the neck. You know, the big lumbering giant. Like that's not from the book. That's the movie. It's different. And yeah, it's another one completely made it his own. And completely you bought into that sympathy that he brings to that character. Like when he meets the blind man.
Well, that's Bride of Frankenstein.
Is that Bride?
Yeah, it's Bride.
Oh, okay.
So in the
Which
first,
is the one where he tosses the little girl into the water?
That's the first one.
Okay, there you go.
That's the
Fuck them kids.
That's the first one. And so the difference is in the first one, he doesn't speak. That's the real difference here.
Yeah.
And he gets loose, and it's like this is just a creature that loathes the fact that he exists.
Yes.
Almost immediately. Because it just doesn't feel right. And he's tortured, he breaks out, and you get the sense this is a creature that just doesn't know any better, just ends up casually murdering people.
It's sort of like of Mice and Men, right? Like it's he doesn't know better and he causes destruction, and then society sort of pushes him away and doesn't try and help him or understand him, which pushes him more to be what they view him as, which is a monster. Yeah, it's sort of like a self-fulfilling thing.
No, I mean, wonderful performances here. I enjoyed, of course, Colin Clive as Dr. Henry Frankenstein, who, of course, returned for the sequel. One of the funny things that you see in these movies is a lot of these actors came back again and again to play different characters. Oh, God. Yeah. You had Edward Van Sloan, who played Helsing in the previous movie. Now he's playing a different doctor, Dr. Waldman. And even Dwight Fry is playing a different fucked up crazy character called Fritz.
I mean, back then, acting jobs seemed more like like a regular job. Like you just kind of go in like, oh yeah, I'm the crazy guy, okay, and you just kind of you go and you play the character. I'm working on 3 movies to get today alone. It's that kind of thing, but I love it. It's it's fun to notice the similar faces.
Yeah, it was. And I believe it was very much the intention, at least like when it came to the climax of the movie, and the whole thing just burns down. Because again, not knowing, of course, that Bride picks up almost immediately where it leaves off, but I was like, it's pretty damn sad. Yeah. And that would have been a great ending, and then we just cut back to, what's his name? Henry on the bed, and then like a joke or some kind of cutesy thing is set off, and then the end. Which is pretty interesting. Pretty funny.
Well, like looking at the sequel, he was, James Whale was one of the first directors to kind of be like, well, if I'm going to come back to do a sequel, I'm going to add some humor to it. I feel like he was one of the first ones to really do that. When you look at like modern films, like
if we can look to me, and we can get more into it when we talk about Bride itself, but this might be one of the very first, if not the first, going back as far as film history we can go, where we have what James Whale did with Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein is what we talk about with like Sam Raimi and Spider-Man 2, or James Gunn and Guardians 2. It's like you have these people who make a great first movie under certain conditions, and then they come back for a sequel completely boundless with what they could do, and they end up turning up a product or a story I want to be unbelievably superior.
Yeah.
Yes. And not just superior in terms of a better movie, but like more representative of who those individuals are as people.
Very much so. Like, you can see the certain liberties taken with Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes.
Like, it literally starts with Mary Shelley.
Yes.
Telling a story, which is the film. And I always thought it was great how the actress that played Mary Shelley played the bride as well.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's little stuff like that.
The great sequences. Great freaking sequences. But Frankenstein was great. Before we get to Bride of Frankenstein, fully.
Yeah.
We should also talk about what came before, because Boris Karloff, wow. His career just went to the stratosphere, because I think immediately after this came The Mummy.
Yeah.
Not with Brendan Fraser, obviously. This is the original movie. Go ahead.
The funniest thing about The Mummy, not the Brendan Fraser one, but the Boris Karloff one, is that it's basically a remake of Dracula.
It is. Yeah.
That's what's so funny about it.
They point that out in the damn bonus feature. It's like, yeah, this movie was definitely part of the era, but like part of the main critique was it's Dracula again.
Yeah.
I mean, it still worked. It's still a fun movie,
Yeah,
it's like,
for sure.
So let's say the horror genre's newest superstar Karloff had his next hit playing the title role in The Mummy. In modern-day Cairo, again emoting under Pierce makeup, Karloff's Ardith Bey is the resuscitated corpse of an ancient Egyptian, lusting after a young woman who resembles and is the reincarnation of his paramour of 3,700 years earlier. Karloff next dawn to that's The Mummy. How do you regard this particular movie? Where do you view The Mummy in terms of like all the other ones?
Well, I really enjoy it. It's a little lower just because it is just a remake of Dracula.
Right.
But there has some really great stuff going.
And to be clear, like beat for beat remake.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's not just like it's a similar story, like exact same scenes.
Yes.
Like maybe even same lines. Like they literally just got the script, scratched out Dracula and wrote in Mummy.
Yeah.
And then handed it in. And an exec was like, "This is brilliant." straight to production. Visuals of the Mummy, especially in the beginning when he is like all wrapped up and like that,
right?
Very well done. And I think that's the most production they've done for that, because it wasn't just like a person wrapped up; like it genuinely looked like creepy,
right?
And well done. Boris Karloff does a fantastic job. Obviously, again, what sells these movies are the performances,
right?
The actors and the moodiness of it all. So a lot of that stuff is really what keeps it above water. Right. It's like, okay, this is a remake, but it's very enjoyable in its own right.
So the very next iteration of The Mummy was the Brendan Fraser movies?
I'm sure there was some...
No, there were sequels to this original.
Yeah.
There was, like, I mentioned earlier, there was, like, I don't know if you don't seem to have seen them. It seems like The Mummy's Ghost and The Mummy's Curse and The Mummy's Tomb. Those are all definitely in this lineup. But, like, the next reinterpretation of this character came in those films, right?
Yeah.
And how were those received in their time?
Well, funny enough, like you're reading the story actually sticks pretty close
to the original movie.
Yeah, as far as this is a reincarnation of this from old dude from Egypt, and he's lusting over this modern day girl who he views as the reincarnation of his old lover. Like that's actually like those motivations, they're the same. So I'm like, that's pretty cool the way they're able to sort of keep that. But obviously it's a very different movie. As far as how it was received, I do think a lot of people kind of at the time, I think, first of all, it was a huge hit. There's a reason why there's a Universal ride of it.
Right.
Massive hit.
I mean, it had 2 sequels, right?
Mm-hmm. But the, quote unquote, movie connoisseurs kind of looked down on it a little bit, and it's like, oh, it's another Indiana Jones knockoff or something like that. But like all great wines, it has aged finely with time. And a lot of people today are like, fuck that. It is just none of this Indiana Jones knockoff bullshit. It's a fantastic horror adventure film all on its own. And I'm one of those people.
Yeah, this is so off tangent, but like critics in that era, early 2000s, what was it with them
they don't know how good they had
it? What was it with them that they bemoaned the Pirates movies and the Mummy movies, but they celebrated Lord of the Rings?
Well, to be fair, I think the first Pirates, I think got pretty good reviews wise. Mm-hmm. Critics loved it. 2 and 3, all of a sudden it's different.
They didn't.
Right? Yeah, I just think Lord of the Rings. It's one of the way it's cohesive. I think just really worked for them.
Because one of them won Best Picture.
Yeah. Return of the King. I think. Yeah. It swept. It won so many awards.
It won 10 Oscars, I think.
Mm-hmm. The good old days.
That wasn't too long ago, although it feels like it was a long time ago.
It was.
So that's just a brief aside there. But anyway, I tend to agree with your observations with this mummy here. Wales, The Bride of Frankenstein with Elsa Lanchester featured in the finale as the monster's recalcitrant mate. In the interim, yet another class... No, it wasn't reluctant.
It was okay.
It was recalcitrant. I don't know this word. It's not reluctant, okay. That's for sure.
I thought you were just butchering the fuck out of reluctant.
No. In the interim, yet another classic monster character appeared, or rather disappeared. Claude Rains made an outlandish Hollywood film debut in the role of the Invisible Man, based on the H.G. Wells novel and directed by Whale. The movie broke with Universal custom by giving little pathos to the title character, a young English scientist driven to megalomania and mass murder by the drugs, and have made him transparent. These next 2 movies, Invisible Man and Bride of Frankenstein, I feel are among the best. At least they tower over some of the other ones, that's for sure. Like, to me, this just may be a bias here, but I would say the 3 Whale movies are the ones that I enjoyed the most.
I honestly, even like with how, because of course when I first saw them, I didn't know what do you call it?
That they were all Whale movies.
Yeah, I would probably agree. Yeah, maybe the Wolfman was up there too. Just I like
I like all of them, to be clear, but it's like, your preference.
We're just talking about like favorites.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, there's just something about them. I think they have the most entertainment value within them,
right?
And artistry.
Mm-hmm. It's like James Whale was the one that really understood what these movies were and how to make them shine. And how to imbue a little bit of his own DNA into these movies to make them a little extra special.
Yeah, you could tell he had a little bit of a twisted sense of humor. Which I think worked really well.
Yeah, like the idea, like in the Invisible Man especially, like people are just like hilariously, like I was laughing so hard when Claude Rains just like killed off like his friend.
It might be
rolling down a hill.
One of the funniest movies I've seen. Like if you just watch it at face value, because so many people die in that movie,
right?
And the Invisible Man is just a dick.
Yeah,
he's just laughing it up. He's like, haha, I'll murder you in your sleep, and you won't even see me coming. Like he loves it. He's like a proto Palpatine, where he's just drunk on power and just loves being evil. And some of the effects that go along with that, like you see him skipping, like where his clothes, you know, and it's hilarious, but it's very intentional as well.
Yeah, that's the thing here. And I think what really makes it, obviously, is Claude Rains.
Yeah.
Now, I love Claude Rains in Casablanca. I also know him from Lawrence of Arabia. But man, I did not know Claude Rains had such a storied history with the monster Universal films, not the least of which, of course, include perhaps his most memorable role, which is, of course, the Invisible Man. And it was so interesting because, and you look at the story behind like how he got this position in the first place, evidently his, I don't know what they call him, like, his, like, when they test or they screen test, evidently it was a disaster. That it was like so theatrical and so over the top, but I believe like it was Whale or somebody was like, no, that's what you need for the character because you don't see them in the movie, so they really need that voice. The voice is perhaps the most important. And, oh my God, did Claude really deliver?
Yes,
he's got an amazing voice, like personally, but then like with this character, wow,
very memorable.
Absolutely. And we don't see his face until the very end of the film, which I also think, up until before Bride of Frankenstein had easily the best ending of those movies. Yeah. Like it ended on exactly the right note. And even in a way where it's like, this is the hardest person, obviously. He's pretty freaking evil. I mean, at least that's what like causes, he ends up, the story here making himself invisible, and it's revealed that the drugs he used were what's causing that insanity, shall we say. But even in the end, like he realizes he was wrong. Basically, like in dialogue, like blurts out the ethos of the film: man should not have meddled in things like this. And then as he dies, he becomes visible. Such a great ending.
Yeah, it's so good. And by the way, some of the best effects. Like when he's revealing himself in the beginning, right? So cool for that. Especially
again,
for
that was groundbreaking stuff. That was so groundbreaking. I'm surprised the Academy didn't care, or maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. The Academy didn't care.
And you've seen the latest iteration of the Invisible Man.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I am thoroughly surprised. Like two great versions of this exist. They're so fucking different for very different reasons, obviously. But like, this is an instance where I saw the remake, quote unquote, first. And I hope people haven't forgotten that movie, but I never will. That,
yeah,
the Lee Winnell movie with Elizabeth Moss that came out a few years back, I thought was freaking phenomenal.
I love it.
I think it's a great fucking movie. I think it made my top 5 of the year. That's a matter. I mean, again, that was 2020. There was hardly any movies, but still, it is so fucking great in how it basically like reinvents what the Invisible Man is. But man,
what I love is that it keeps the core essence of the character.
Yeah.
Or the core thing that makes him scary is this incredible power in the hands of a fucked up sociopath.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the core of the Invisible Man. Right? And they keep that, but they tell him more, they go in a very different route with the story and all of that. And of course they modernize it. It's not like some, solution they drink with all the little thing, mixing potions and drinking shit. It's more technology, the suit and all that. But yeah, I think it's a great example of a modern update where it's like you keep the core essence of what makes it work.
Yeah. With
like entirely new story and structure. But yeah.
And then, of course, how that movie ended, where it was like, bye-bye, Invisible Man, hello, Invisible Woman.
Yeah. You'll get the Invisible Woman sequel.
I really think that's Elizabeth Moss's best performance, and it is really a crime the Academy did not play ball and like give her, like, if we're talking about like the great horror performances that were ignored by the Academy, I would say Elizabeth is in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many.
There's too many. There's so many. There's too many. But yeah, I Great fucking movie, Invisible Man. And then, of course, it was immediately followed with another whale horror movie, The Bride of Frankenstein, which I personally feel is the crowning achievement. And I don't think that's really a controversial statement from the history footage that I've seen of people, at least the historians, film historians calling it that. That one is just, there's an extra bit of something special in it. Like, I think even to me, as somebody who is watching that film for the first time in 2022, nearly 100 years later after that film is made, and I feel like what that film is really going for is just so beautifully and heartbreakingly communicated almost a century later. And like and honestly, it's like what really surprised me was how deceptive, or shall we even say, what a subversion it is, the title of the film. Because when you go into this, you think, oh, this is about this new monster called the Bride of Frankenstein. She's not really in this movie.
She is there for like 2 minutes tops.
Yeah. It's the very end. But this film is called The Bride of Frankenstein, which is really interesting. Now, again, this may be in an era where like titles were prioritized over whether or not it made any sense for what the movie actually. But this is actually, for me, like the real Frankenstein movie. Whereas in the first film, it's like he's there and you feel sympathy for him, but it very much is through the lens of Dr. Frankenstein himself being the main character, right? Mm-hmm. Here we have Frankenstein. And him just, I mean, what can I even say? Him just trying to exist. Him trying to just not be terrorized for a change, right? Mm-hmm. And the stuff that he went through was just so unbelievably heartbreaking. And I feel like the moment where it really like surprisingly got to me on a level where it's like, this is really up there where with some of the best pieces of art, because, and it comes when you least of all expect it, but when he makes the acquaintance and eventual friendship of the blind monk. Is he a monk or the blind guy that just lives in the middle of the woods? Mm-hmm. I don't know what his actual name is. But because he is blind, he is able to show humanity. He is able to show kindness because he does not see a monster. He can't. But he also doesn't hear one, right? Mm-hmm. But I felt what was so... But to me, that's kind of like what it really shouldn't be a surprise, like why it resonated with me so much, because that's also like why I love things like E.T. or just generally speaking with like two particular individuals who could not be more different end up finding commonality and common ground and humanity and kindness. And in that sequence where he kind of just like breaks down and was like, my prayers have been answered at long last, I have a friend. And then you cut to Frankenstein and just like this tear that comes out of his eyes. And it's like, wow.
Yeah. And it's really a level of emotion you hadn't seen in the previous ones. Not in that way. Not in that, and not in a horror film, you know?
No. That was genuinely touching.
Yeah.
And maybe even in a way, some audiences in that time couldn't quite understand, you know? But very much so, there have been a lot of readings, obviously, of this film, and obviously there's always debates of, you know, the death of the author takes place when Whale no longer is here.
A lot of that stuff was very much in the book, right?
Yeah.
But translation, I think, was a lot more difficult back then. Mm-hmm. Because the story, even though I think Bride takes a little bit, like The Blind Man takes a little bit from the novel itself.
Right.
You know, the original ends with the death of the book, I mean, but also kind of the movie, right? With the death of Victor Frankenstein and the monster as well.
Yeah, right.
So with the sequel, it's a lot of it is new territory. You know?
Right.
They bring in a lot of their own original stuff.
It's a great example of taking liberties from the source material.
Yeah,
and maybe even making something better.
Mm-hmm. Like The Bride of Frankenstein, like that's all And I think maybe I haven't looked it up. Maybe that's what they were kind of going for. The way it starts, is to be like, yeah, we know the bride isn't like part of the book, but like this is kind of her saying like, well, this. Imagine Mary Shelley going like, well, I got another story, you know. It kind of feels like that,
right? And this is what it would look like, right?
Yeah.
We should talk about also Pretorius.
Yeah.
Professor Pretorius in this movie, who acts like, I guess, the devil in this movie. Like he's very much steering Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein, into like temptation in a way.
Do it again.
Yeah, basically do it again. But man, that performance, so delicious, so entertaining.
A lot more humor in this, deliberate humor, right? That especially stems from him.
Definitely so. I love that scene with Pretorius meeting Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
In that crypt. And I think it says so much about Pretorius. He is not the least bit startled. No. Every time Frankenstein creeps up on this person, with the exception of his blind friend, they've him terrified. And he's just like, oh, hi there.
Who is more terrifying?
And here I thought I was alone. I think those were his words verbatim. But again, in that it was a very fascinating conversation, right? But to me, one of the more harrowing ones was when, again, at this point, Frankenstein had learned how to speak through his friend. Unfortunately, people come in the way of that friendship, and he is forced to flee from it. And so he stumbles upon this crypt where Pretorius is there. Guess what? Desecrating it, of course, and then literally dancing on graves as he's having like his own little like party there. And while they're having an exchange, and at this point Pretorius, informs him that they're going to make a friend for him. And there is a line in there that is just so indicative of his suffering, where he says like, "Dead was good. I like dead." And I don't recall the actual line now that I'm talking about it, but basically to the effect of he doesn't like being alive.
Like no one hurt him when he was dead.
He was happy when he was dead, which suggests the parts of humanity that are within him were at peace, and they've been disturbed, and now part of this different entity. And that's just the curse of Frankenstein. He's just constantly in pain because he was brought back from the dead.
He's in a state where he will never belong. Not quite dead, not quite alive, not amongst the living. The living reject him, the dead, he's no longer among, So it's sort of that like tragedy, Yeah. He's always a tragic character. I think the last line in the film by him is like, we belong dead.
Yes.
I think that was it. So yeah,
because that was the final insult. That's where I really felt really bad for him. Was like he was so happy, he had a friend, like he was so into this idea, like maybe this. But then when she rejected him, like he's like, fuck this. I'm pulling the lever and killing everybody.
Well, that was like his last. I think in his mind, that's his last chance at any sort of connection. Because, if she's like me, like maybe she'll accept me then too. Right. And it's like, nope.
That didn't happen. And he blew the whole thing to Kingdom Come. That sequence though of
what an incel.
Right, bringing the bride to life was so captivating, so movie magical. Yeah. We shouldn't, ignore the score here. This was the first film where the score was truly just beautiful here.
It's pretty telling how iconic the Bride of Frankenstein is, considering she has like no lines and like
it's just a look.
Yeah.
It's just a look and a scream.
Like 2 minutes tops.
Yes.
And that was it. Like she's just as iconic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty amazing.
Can you believe we fucking missed out seeing this on the big screen? It played near us earlier this month.
I know. I remember you told me, and I was desperate. I didn't tell you, but I was desperate to try and like move my calendar. And when I realized I couldn't, I was just like, fuck.
I would have gone with you.
No,
I would have gone with you.
I know. I wouldn't have told you unless I knew for sure I could move it.
But you just were like,
and
oh
it's
no.
just I couldn't. And I'm just like, this is... Oh my God.
Did that break you?
Yes. It did. You know how amazing it would have been to see that on the big screen? Oh my gosh. That would have been great. Well, also at the time, I actually didn't know how interested you would have been. Because at the time, you didn't show any interest in like watching them. At that time. Like a week later, you did.
I mean, I'll put it to you this way. Mm-hmm. I feel at this point I'm game to see whatever movie in theaters, you know?
Yeah.
Like
especially older films.
Sure, like we watched The Thing. I watched The Thing for the first time in a movie theater.
That was amazing. I think that was so cool.
Even going and watching Avatar again was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like we've been seeing a lot of older films. We just saw E.T. Oh my God.
Magical.
We didn't have a chance to talk about it, but like we went to go see E.T. in IMAX. And I think all you had to say, because I don't know what there left was to say, was like, what a picture.
I think I said that like 5 times walking to the car. What a picture.
I'm not going to forget that, though, because that was really magical for me, especially the climax of the film when the music is just swelling, the emotion is hitting its peak, and it's just like the trumpets in that so moving and so powerful. And of course, the IMAX like audio. And the 4K was incredible. You could see the pastels in the opening of the film.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And I know you're going to be pissed off, but like Jaws looked even better. Jaws, that 4K restoration, amazing.
I mean, you're right. I am going to be pissed off. Fuck you.
But, you know, we've been going out of our way to do that more often, you know, just to watch the older films. There was another one, I think, this year. It wasn't just The Thing, was it? It was something else we saw that was older, wasn't there?
That we saw?
That we had meant to go see. But Bride would have been definitely one that I'm just down to see any old movie.
Yeah. I think there is, you know, it's... A lot of these, when people talk about like the magic of just seeing a movie in a movie theater, they're not wrong. You know, there's just something special about it. And because all these movies that we've seen, a couple of them you've seen for the first time, but a lot of them I've seen, all of them really, I've seen 100 times over before. But it's still just the experience of seeing it in a movie theater. It really does feel like watching it for the first time, in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now having watched Bride and how much I love it, damn the chance we let slip by.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it wasn't for you. Maybe it was for me. It wasn't let slip. It was like it was for like I had.
There was no choice.
Yeah,
there was no choice.
It wasn't a choice, basically.
Yeah.
I was recently I saw some fun facts about the actress on Twitter of Elsa Lanchester, who played the bride, and Mary Shelley. And it says in her autobiography, newly reissued, she says she was a professional fake mistress when there was no fault in a divorce. And I guess because, like, you couldn't just get divorced back then. So she'd be hired to be seen going into a hotel room with a married man so the wife could save face. And then, be able to get divorced.
Great. I mean, you got to make a living somehow, right?
Yeah, and it says the opening chapter is her recalling a May Day celebration with her socialist organizer factory worker father. Oh, that's funny.
It is. Very much so. The Bride of Frankenstein, really, that was the peak, and then it seemed for a few years they were just doing like sequels and sequels and sequels. By the 1940s, the Universal Horror Factory was turning out more sequels and original monsters, going back to the texture. The best of the new bunch was The Wolfman in 1941, which is a good 6 years after Bride of Frankenstein, as a matter of fact, with Lon Chaney Jr. as a young Welshman bitten by a werewolf who now sprouts hair, fangs, and claws by the light of the autumn moon. A howling success, the Wolfman soon joined the studio's other chief creeps in monster rally movies like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman that brought multiple monsters together in single films. The Wolfman I really liked. That was so enjoyable.
Yeah, I think that one, it's just... It has all the great production value. It's like beautiful sets. Like they have these vast outdoor,
yes,
like I don't know, forests, like all these trees and all this fog where he runs through.
Their fog machines are definitely
like the makeup and the transformation.
Yeah,
and they really sell the creepiness with a lot of it. Like when he goes to talk to the gypsy woman.
Yeah,
and she's telling him like, the curse of the wolf by the full moon, and it has the most horror, I think. But again, what always makes me laugh is it for all the violence, it feels like the one thing that they knew they could get away with is just like choking a bitch out. Because I feel like most of the kills just kind of start with like, I gotcha, I'm gonna grab you by the neck.
Right. And then it cuts away.
And then they're like, he was torn to pieces.
Really? I didn't see that.
Oh no, they say it.
No, I know. I'm playing along with you. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They say it.
I really like that one, but I also think as far as like favorite monsters, I always really like the werewolf.
Oh yeah.
So I think that went along with it.
Werewolves are cool.
Yes, cool.
The next one we have. I mean, I think Lon Chaney Jr. is very good in the role. Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm always going to be happy to see Claude Rains pop up. But just like the Wolfman is, I think he has the most amount of horror. But then also, this one though, I would say. Because this ended up being a human being first and then becoming a monster, this one hits a very tragic ending.
Yeah, well, it's a curse, right? Right. Like the biggest victim is also like the monster. And I guess that's also somewhat similar to Frankenstein. But like the first half of the movie, like it's not even like, especially for that time, like leading man, composed, like non-emotional. He was freaking the fuck out, in the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that really adds to
the paranoia.
Yeah.
You can definitely feel that shit.
But he wasn't pulling that, like, tough man, stoic shit. Like, no, he's like, what's fucking happening to me? He's... and I think that really sells the emotion and the connection to him as a character. Right, like he really doesn't want what's happening to happen.
One observation I did make, and this is obviously one of the things that wouldn't age well with films that are nearly a century old. With, I think, Dracula and with Mummy and with the Wolfman, you have, they're so bare to bones. I feel more comfortable, I guess, referring to them as like archetypes or types more so than characters. But a lot of like the supporting guys here, their whole thing is, I gotta get the girl.
Oh my god. That's like the biggest component to like horror. Right. Like it's such a huge staple. I'm actually glad you pointed it out, because that's the thing. It's funny when Werewolf by Night came out. I saw people like pull up old Marvel comic covers of both Werewolf by Night and Moon Knight, and it's them running in with Dracula, basically saying like, hey, Dracula's technically in the MCU and da-da-da-da-da. And someone pointed out, like, why is Dracula holding a white-haired blonde woman in every cover? Like, he's just running away with some white lady.
Because he's horny?
Yeah, but I mean, that's what it is. Like, horror has always been horny.
Yeah.
I guess is a way to put it. Even King Kong, the whole thing is him.
Well, Creature of the Black Lagoon, when we get to that, that's...
oh my god, Creature of the Black Lagoon, very much that. And I think that's why once you get to, like, the 70s and the 80s, sex is such a big component of horror. And
then eventually, what was it? Was it Jason Voorhees is born?
Yeah, with like the slashers and all that. Like, it's very much always been intertwined in that way. But yeah.
Wait, because one of the things I noticed with was it Lon Chaney Jr. here in Wolfman, the guy's just creeping up on this girl through this telescope. And then he's so like confident in like that he reveals like, yeah, but what about the necklace in your upstairs bedroom? That doesn't play well today, does it?
Back then, being an overbearing stalker was like, hey, he's a go-getter.
That just shows how much he wants to win you over.
Yeah.
It's not at all creepy.
Yeah. Like, speaking of King Kong, if you see the original King Kong, the like main guy is like the boat captain, and his whole thing is like he acts like a piece of shit to like the main girl and Pharaoh. Like, I don't want the sea is no place for a woman. That kind of shit.
Right.
And then it's funny in the Peter Jackson remake, those scenes are in the movie that they're making in the movie, right? Wow. And she's actually in Peter Jackson. She's attracted to the writer who's writing those scenes, and she's like, "What is this, stuff?" And it's just kind of funny the way they did that. They kind of
for sure.
The way they kind of removed themselves from that, but still had it there. Like they're kind of watching it within the film. But yeah, that's funny.
And while we're on this, like, in terms of like, of course, women in these 30s movies, 40s movies are going to be treated in a certain way. But what was really striking, though, we didn't really mention this yet, but in the Spanish language version of Dracula, in terms of like how the women there were dressed, it's very different than how the English version and how they were dressed.
You can get a little more risque in down in the south of the border.
1931, wow.
Yeah.
The Latin are definitely romantic people, it would seem.
Yes, they were a little bit more relaxed with that kind of stuff. Hell, they were just ahead of the curve,
And we should also mention, of course, the Spanish language one was superiorly directed.
Yeah.
It's just, there wasn't any Bela Lugosi.
That's the issue, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people, of course, as film lovers and connoisseurs of, those old classic films have always said, man, what they would give to have taken the Spanish language film, but insert Bela Lugosi. And his performance, right? Kind of combine them, the two in that way. But I do think that the whole story of why it's superior is really funny.
It is, because basically it's like at that point dubbing wasn't really a thing, and so Universal was like, okay, let's just make a Spanish language version of this at the same time we're making the regular version, and they'll just use the exact same sets, the same script more or less, and then we'll have them be the nighttime crew, and they'll come and shoot their scenes when the main crew goes home. But it didn't occur to them, which is basically what happened to them. It's like they took a look at what was shot that day, and they just like went out of their way to like improve it as the film was being shot. It's so funny.
That's so funny. I love stories like that. Yeah, that's great.
So as we move past the Wolfman, then we get into an interesting bit of the next movie is somewhat of a departure from the other ones in that it's in color. So we have the Phantom once again haunted the studio's mammoth Phantom stage, but this time with sound and in color as Claude Rains donned the mask of the Phantom of the Opera in an opulent 1943 remake. The magnificence of the production was recognized. This is interesting. By the following March at the Academy Awards ceremony, when its cinematographers and art set directors picked up Oscars for their work. It is so hilarious to me. Again, I mentioned it earlier, Gods and Monsters, a movie about the guy that made horror movies ends up winning an Academy Award. But Phantom of the Opera was the only movie in this roster to win anything from the Academy. And it won, it said right here, 2, it picked up for art and set direction and cinematography. Of all the movies, Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah. And I think it really comes from the fact that it's the biggest as far as like production and
right.
Like they really sold it, I think, as like this big movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is...
And it was a big hit. It was a big box office hit when it came out.
Oh, yeah. But it's one of those where it's kind of not horror to a certain extent.
It's kind of not, as in it's more kind of a musical.
Yeah.
Or kind of, or even sometimes a flat-out comedy.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Like the 1925 version very much lead into horror. A lot more than this one.
Yes. And this one you could feel, because of that, this one feels several degrees of separation from the DNA found in most of all the other movies.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's why it's a little bit of like the redheaded stepchild. and that it's just very different.
It's very different, but I also get the impression, because I know like most people these days, well, they look at the Andrew Lloyd Webber adaptation as the definitive version of this, and they also look back to the silent film version with Lon Chaney as the definitive horror one, and it just makes you wonder, like, where is this movie in the legacy of the Phantom of the Opera?
Yeah.
It just feels like it's not talked about,
you
know? Which is a shame, because I genuinely like the performances in the movie. I really like Claude Rains. And I was entertained with the film itself.
It's still the good story of
it's still good. I think I feel you may agree with this, but it may just come in dead last with these movies, as far as like with the overall, like what I would want out of these kind of movies, because it doesn't feel
it like feels weird the way they sell it along with the other ones.
Yeah. Very much so.
Yeah.
But of course, it also makes it all... That's the only one to win an Academy Award?
Yeah.
Of course, right?
Of course.
Typical
that's the
Academy.
Way that shit always pans out.
Isn't it depressing how that's just remained intact for like decades and decades on end?
Yes.
So this is 1943, and so the next big one, which is really the last one, did not come out in the 1950s. In the 1950s, Universal re-entered the fight field with some Karloff starring terror tales like The Strange Door, The Black Castle, and then also an assortment of giant insect movies like Tarantula and The Deadly Mantis.
Oh, yeah.
And other outlandish monstrosities like It Came from Outer Space and the Mole People. The last of the classic Universal monsters surfaced in Creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954, in which an expedition to the Amazon discovers a fantastic manfish, an aquatic beastie who, in the time-honored tradition, casts his worshipful, lidless eyes on the trope's beautiful woman scientist. The movie was shot in the then new 3D process, with the added innovation of being the first stereoscopic production to take its cameras underwater. Bringing the story of the studio and its monsters full circle, Universal and Creature star Carlson were exactly the same age. Carlson having been born at the end of April 1912, just hours from the moment when the Universal Film Manufacturing Company was born.
Wow.
That's incredible. Destroyed by fires and floods, stakes and silver bullets, the Universal franchise monsters are forever returning to scare up new generations of fans. So that's the later years. But sticking with, this is the last one, the last major one. Because I think literally when I'm looking at the timeline here, Creature from the Black Lagoon was released in the year 1954, I want to say. And then they only had 3 other films in that lineup. The next one was Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. And then the last 2 was Revenge of the Creature and The Creature Walks Among Us, the direct sequels of Creature of the Black Lagoon.
Well, at that point, you start hitting the 60s, and then movies are just different.
Well, sci-fi takes over, right?
Sci-fi takes over. Again, you get like The Thing.
Yes. The first Thing, you mean?
Yeah, the first Thing. For sure. What is it? The Day the Earth Stood Still. Like you really start to get into sci-fi like that. Of course, you get like the Twilight Zone TV show.
Oh yeah.
So like the face of horror just kind of slowly starts to shift, and then then you hit the 70s, and you're hitting slashers now.
Although with Creature from the Black Lagoon, and this one is like definitely the end of this era, but maybe even more so like a great transition to all those things you just said and to future incarnations of horror. Even if it wasn't the immediate thing, it did come back, because when I saw this movie, it definitely felt like the inspiration for like things that we would get like Predator or Alien.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I feel like the creature feature in a way kind of comes from this. Or even films like Anaconda or any of the Anaconda movies. Like all of that feels like it came from this movie.
I would not disagree. And there's, especially with stuff like Anaconda and stuff, there's a lot of that, fucking with the Amazon. And it's like, again, that sort of thing of like man meddling where it shouldn't, and it discovers something that bites back or attacks back.
Wow. And boy, did it. Like, again, like you can tell in many, many ways that this film came out a bit of a time after the early films. I mean, look, the first 2 films, Dracula and Frankenstein, came out in 1931. This came out in 1954. It's a different freaking world. And one of the things that you just see, I mean, first of all, we're on location.
Yes.
That's one of the things you could see.
No more backlot.
No more backlot. We're on location. It definitely feels like we're outside, even though I don't know if we were. A lot of underwater stuff, right? But one of the things you'll notice, a lot more skin.
Yeah. Oh my. Yes.
A lot more skin. Where
bathing suits and all that.
It didn't occur to me. Wow. Their skin. It didn't occur to me how much people were just dressed up completely in the other movies. Where it's like you come here and it's like, I think one of the guys is just like in shorts the entire time.
Oh yeah.
And then even the girl herself is in like this, at the time, what I would imagine would be considered somewhat of a risque bathing suit. And then, of course, maybe in the movie's most impactful moment, performs, well, not performance, but just like is swimming rather provocatively in light of what else is also swimming along with her.
Yeah, man, they were real proud of their underwater cameras. Because, yeah, like there's... that's one of the big scenes of them, her sort of swimming along unknowingly, and he's swimming under her, and sort of in love. I don't... Well, if we were to ask Guillermo del Toro, definitely in love.
I mean, this is basically... The Shape of Water wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this movie, basically, right? Like, this is... like... the Best Picture winning The Shape of Water. We should be clear about that. The Best Picture winning. A feat La La Land couldn't achieve.
And shouldn't.
And shouldn't. But, no, this was also, I would say, easily the most graphic.
Yeah, for sure.
Of all of these movies. And again, it makes sense, right? It's the most recent one of all of these. But people get picked apart. Like that's one of the things like that you see in like that became tropes in films like Aliens or Predator, right? Like where one by one the team just gets picked off.
Yeah. And then also sort of like that final showdown at the end.
Yeah.
Where he gets shot. Like that's and they kind of show it, you know. And that's something that wouldn't happen, like we talked about with Dracula, where it's just kind of like, and they move the camera, we're killing him now. You know?
We can't show you, but we want to make sure you know that.
It's happening.
Whereas here, no, we're going to show you. And we did.
And great effects, I think, also.
Great effects, and holy shit, that music. Every time the creature pops up, fuck, was it blaring in your face? Like, even to the point where it was a bit overbearing, I gotta be honest.
Oh my god, I'm so glad you brought it up. I remember as a kid thinking, like, they need to chill with this thing. They need to, like, relax. Because there's even a hint that he's coming. Boom, they start blaring it, you know? Like...
That's not even doing it justice. Like, at the top of their lungs. Of course, it's instrumentation. It's the main theme, but it's like, you know, screaming dead ass, like completely. For even the suggestion of its presence, but it's like it's not at all refined. Like it's like they had like they recorded one instance of it, but then they just blasted in you. And I was watching it late at night. And holy shit, I had to lower the volume because it was just, I felt like I was being blown away.
They try to burn that shit into your skull.
Yeah, that's for sure. But then that's really it then, right? That's kind of, that's the end of the era. And then, of course, horror evolved into all of the different ways it did back then. One of the things I would encourage people to watch, if you want to know more about history with horror, I believe it's called, is it Horror Noir?
Oh, yeah.
The documentary movie on Shudder.
Yeah, Black Horror.
Yeah. Talk about. Which, of course, features Blackula. And Night of the Living Dead.
Yes.
How far off were we from that one? Wasn't that 1959?
I think it's in the 60s.
Oh, 60, yeah, because it would be civil rights era related, wouldn't it? Because that's right where we should be that anyway. But yeah, I just want to
68, yeah.
Yeah. I loved these movies. I adore them, and I'm forever gonna appreciate their existence. And like, if I ever get the chance to like put them on again, for a spooky season, it's a great fucking watch. Like and to me, I feel like more, particularly with Invisible Man and The Bride of Frankenstein. Well, just like The Bride of Frankenstein, I think officially it was just like one of my favorite films ever.
Yeah, I think that one, and it's also kind of widely agreed upon.
Yeah,
where that's the one that's it's the top one.
Yeah,
it's really elevated. Yeah,
like it stays with you, definitely for sure. But yeah, before we go, can you describe what the horror houses look like? Since you are a frequent, shall we say, clientele of the Universal Horror Nights.
They're different every year.
Mm-hmm. So, which are all of these monsters featured, or just some of them?
It depends.
Okay.
Sometimes they talk about like just the horror. Like I remember one year I went to one of the houses and it was it was all of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the Wolfman, Frankenstein, Dracula. They even had the Invisible Man. They had it where it's like he was in black against black light and he would take it off and it looks like he was invisible and stuff like that. So they had everything. And then another one was like Bride of Frankenstein versus the Wolfman. And it sort of told a story that picked up like right after the Bride of Frankenstein.
You know what's surprising? In all of these movies, they did like Son of Frankenstein, and they kept going off with Frankenstein, but they didn't do anything more with Bride of Frankenstein. As like her having her own solo project.
But that's why I'm telling you, it's so incredible that it like remained iconic, you know? The fact that it was just sort of lost to time was like an interesting trivia of like, did you know Frankenstein had a wife at one point? You know?
Mm-hmm.
But she's as iconic in a lot of ways as the monster of Frankenstein himself. That's neat to me. That it can survive in that way. But yeah, I would recommend if you're listening to this and you've never been to Horror Nights, Universal Horror Nights, you can actually go online and just look at the years past mazes.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have like really great people do a really good job recording them, or you can really see the experience. Of course, it's not the same as being there, but you can really see what it's like in the different ones. And yeah, I think this year I wasn't able to go this year, which that's I think that's the worst of it, that I wasn't able to go this year.
You think so? I mean, you missed out on experiencing the Academy Museum. You missed out on seeing Jaws in IMAX. You missed out on seeing 90-year-old John Williams in concert. To say nothing, of course, of all the films you have been unable to see.
Thank you.
Not that you needed the
reminder. Yes. It was very
you also
necessary.
missed out? Oh, that was last year. Never mind. That's a whole different thing.
Very, very necessary.
Oh, and I forgot to add in the Bride of Frankenstein on the big screen. Oh my gosh. But hey, it wasn't all bad. You got to see E.T. and the Thing on the big screen.
I think the Thing was before I was busy.
So was E.T.
No.
Yeah, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to go.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
There was no way you would have gone all the way to freaking like San Diego.
You know what? Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm right.
So it's like, and by the way, before we sign off here, if you're down to do what we did last year, because last year we actually went to go to San Diego to see Being the Ricardos and West Side Story. If there are two films that happen to be playing nearby in that area that you happen to want to go see, definitely down to go do that.
Shazam and
Shazam is coming out this year.
Oh my god!
Now, Lee Winnell remade The Invisible Man. Is he not also doing another horror film with Ryan Gosling?
Yeah.
Because I remember there was a project that was announced immediately thereafter, right? But or maybe not?
I don't know.
There's one coming out next year, Insidious, Fear of the Dark.
Is he directing that one?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No, he's not. I'm sorry.
Okay. Because I know he's a producer on those.
No. Patrick Wilson is actually directing that one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's interesting. Insidious Fear of the Dark. That's the 4th movie?
5th, I think.
That is interesting. But last I saw he was attached to a project with Ryan Gosling. I think it was Wolfman, was it not?
I feel like it was Wolfman, but let me look it up.
Is Chloe Zhao still doing... Wasn't she doing a Dracula movie?
Oof. I don't know about that. I mean, she was, but I don't know if it's still...
A thing. Because was it like finalized, or was it just like a rumor or in development? It's been a while since a lot of these stories have had updates. But you don't think Eternals derailed her career, did it? I mean, she just won the Academy Award for Best Director.
I don't think it kind of hurt it, but I don't think it derailed it.
Yeah.
No, I can't find it. I can't. I think it was the Wolfman.
Because I'd love to see a Chloe Zhao Dracula movie.
Yeah, oh, fuck yeah. There was a lot of like monster movies announced. There was like several Draculas. I think one with like what's his name? Nicolas Cage, but I don't know who was directed that one. But the more the merrier is what I say.
Is Marvel Studios gonna do?
Well, what's great about them is they don't have to do like Dracula or the Wolfman or whatever ones. They have their own character. They can do Man-Thing. They can do Werewolf by Night, which is basically the Wolfman, but it's different.
The most recent thing I found was from November of last year, where it says Chloe Zhao teases her sci-fi Western remake of Dracula. What she said is, let's see here. No, I like that. It's just like looking at Jessica Bruder's book, Nomadland, and to really see behind the pages, to discover the meanings behind each page and the essence of it. I'm a huge fan of the book. I believe Bram Stoker, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to see what essence I can find in Dracula, and then be able to reimagine this really beloved character I love so much. She added, I like complicated characters. That was a very important book for me. Immortality is something that started exploring on Eternals, but it is something I want to question and understand.
She's on quite the kick for these particular themes.
It seems to be that way. I mean, yeah. So, evidently it was well enough into production. But yeah, I mean, even here, November 2021, Chloe Zhao was really hyping up her next movie for sure is Dracula.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. For sure, then. That's something to look forward to.
Oh, yeah. And then if we get that Lee Winnell Wolfman with Ryan Gosling, oh my God. And then I imagine we have to have an Invisible Woman.
That would be
Elizabeth
fun.
Moss?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's your template, Universal. There's your fucking dark universe. I didn't even mention that. You joked about it earlier in the podcast, but like, what a fucking joke that was. Because, of course, I mean, that crashed and burned with... I never saw it. Did you see that movie?
I have no reason to see it.
The Mummy remake with Russell Crowe and Tom Cruise, which nobody liked, apparently. It was so bad, it destroyed their plans for a cinematic universe of monsters. Just imagine that. It was so bad, it destroyed their universe plans.
I'm glad that they at least had the tenacity to quit before fucking it up and just ruining their slate forever. Like,
you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of like Liz Truss like quitting her job as prime minister after 44 days. It's like she realized, you know what? This is as good as it's gonna get. This is a fuck up. I can't do anything about it. I'm gone, and I respect that honestly. Honestly, I know she's being trashed. I respect her for knowing she's not up for the job, and she just got the fuck out of there.
Yeah.
Where would we be if more people realized that and just left and got out of the way? At least she had the decency to get out of the way. And Universal had the decency to just like say, nope, This is too embarrassing even for us. We're not doing this.
That's a funny notion.
It is. It is. Meanwhile, DC and Warner Brothers.
That's something else entirely. Yeah.
Yeah. They never quit. They never will. And here we are all these years later and all this different stuff. But yeah, overall, great discussion with these movies, Peter. And I hope to have you back more often in November because we've got a lot of movies coming out with Wakanda Forever, Strange Worlds, Glass Onion, Fablemans, also Pinocchio, the Banshees of Inisherin, Tar, She Said, Women Talking, Babylon, Avatar 2. It's a lot of fucking that'll be coming out in our way. Oh, Wendell and Wild.
Oh yeah,
also.
that one, yeah.
So, are you okay? No, you're dead tired. Okay. Thank you all so much for listening. Have a happy Halloween, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.